Welcome to another exciting session for the Adventure for Kansas Day. It's our state's 163rd birthday today. We're about to take you on an adventure about Kansas critters and their adaptations. This is Bailey. Apparently, she is the queen of the zoo, is what I hear. So we're really excited to learn what you got to tell us today.
Yeah, so I have a lot of our animal ambassadors. Our animal ambassadors here you cannot see out in the zoo. Instead, they are working animals that help us teach you specifically about their species. So we're going to start over here and with one of our cutest, fluffiest ambassadors. This is Bean. Now, he is a domestic rabbit, but he has a lot of the same features or adaptations. And you're going to hear the word adaptations a lot throughout this presentation, and that is something an animal has or does that helps them survive. Now, his adaptations are pretty similar to the rabbits that you might see out in your yard, like the cottontails. He's got the cute little ears, which help him do a couple of different things. The first thing they do is they act just like our ears, and they help us hear. But since he has those really big ones, if you take your hands and cup them behind, you see how sometimes that can help you hear things that are further away a little bit better. Well, it'd be pretty silly for a bunny like him to cup their ears, so instead they have that built-in funnel to help them hear things even better. The second thing they do is a really big, important process, and it has a really big sciencey word, and it's called thermoregulation. So thermo means heat, and regulation means staying steady. I want you guys to repeat that word because it's a pretty hard word. Say thermoregulation.
Thermoregulation.
Awesome. So when he gets a little bit warmer, especially in those summer months, he can pump some blood up through his ears, and they'll kind of turn a pinkish color with all of that blood. And that helps cool it down because more of that air can pass through on his ears. Another really great adaptation he has is actually where his eyes are placed. Our eyes are on the front of our face because we are predators, and that means we eat other things. Prey animal, which means they're hunted by other animals, generally have the eyes on the side of their head. So if you look close at him, you can see that his eyes are on the side. Now, you may have tried sneaking up on a rabbit at home in your yard, and if you're anything like me, even if you try to run your absolute hardest, you're not quite fast enough to catch up with them. And that is because they have a better vision. So we can see things right in front of us. Because as hunters, we'll need to be able to see what we are chasing. But prey species don't need to chase their food, because I've never seen a piece of grass or a piece of lettuce running away. That would be pretty ridiculous. So instead, he needs to be able to see what's around him to try to run away in case there might be any other predators. Being a prey species, getting away from predators is really, really important. So he has another feature that lets him get away from predators if he does happen to get caught. Now, you might see that he has this beautiful, beautiful fluffy fur. And even if I just pet him a couple of times, I might get some fur on my hands. And that is because they shed so much. You may have some dogs at home that shed quite a bit, especially during the warmer months, but their fur sheds anytime it is touched. It is something called a fur slip. So if they happen to be grabbed by a predator, that fur can just be pulled off, and they can slip away from what might want to eat them. So their predator would end up with a mouthful of fur and not a really good snack. Are there any questions about Bean or rabbits today?
Yeah, they're really curious about what they eat right now.
Yeah, so his diet is all vegetables. He is a very healthy rabbit. He eats both a concentrated pellet made specially for rabbits, as well as some of his favorite things happen to be carrots and lettuce as well.
They're also wondering, does they like to be held?
He will like to be held sometimes. Most of the time, he prefers to be on the ground. So we let him do his own walking around. Now, I would never recommend holding a wild rabbit because they can have pretty sharp claws, and their back legs are so powerful. If you've ever seen a rabbit hop, you can see how fast they can go. So those back legs can be very, very strong.
The last question is, they're curious how long, what's their lifespan or life expectancy?
So wild rabbits have a much shorter lifespan of just a couple of years. They can reproduce at just 1 year old, and so they live pretty quickly. Domestic rabbits depend on where they are kept. If they are inside, they can live up into their teens. If they are kept outside, then that lifespan shortens quite a bit to maybe about 4 to 5 years. Awesome. We're going to move on to our next one. This right here is our brown tarantula Texas. Now this is a shed of a tarantula. This is from a different species. They're South American cousins. But you guys can see how incredible the hairs on their exoskeleton are. So their exoskeleton acts like a protective structure for them, kind of like a shell. But anytime they grow or eat too much, they will need to shed it. So that is something that happens pretty regularly. When they shed it, they will actually have that soft inside, so they'll come on up, pull their legs out, and keep on moving around. Now, this is not a super quick process. It happens over a couple of hours, but they do it in a way where they can hide and get away from any possible predators. They are kind of a mix between a predator and a prey species as well. They do eat meat. They are carnivores, but what they eat is going to be pretty small. They have some venom, which is a kind of a chemical in their fangs, but if they were to bite something like us, it wouldn't be strong enough to hurt us. However, if you were a small animal, like a tiny little mouse or something, it would be a lot more potent or dangerous for you. So his name is Texas, our brown tarantula, and that's because they are really commonly known for being in Texas, but they are all the way up through Kansas. We have lots of different spider species that play a really important role in keeping down those other bugs that we aren't a huge fan of. Now tarantulas, unlike other spiders, don't make these beautiful ornate webs. Instead, they actually live in burrows or little holes in the ground. As they get bigger, just how your clothes get bigger as you get bigger, their burrows will get a little bit bigger and bigger. To keep that dirt from falling into that hole, they'll line it with their web. So they make that same web-like structure, but it's not something that they use to make like a hammock instead. Awesome. Are there any questions about?
Yeah, a lot of questions about what they eat regularly.
Yeah, so they're going to eat different kinds of insects, as well as any other small frogs or even small mammals. Anything that they can catch and is small enough for them to eat, they will.
And then they want to know if you hold it.
I do not personally hold it. We like to respect their Texas's space, and it's not his favorite thing. So we give him the ability to walk from one enclosure to another, and then he prefers it that way. The next one I have over here is our big brown bat. Now, big brown bats don't get their name because they're big. They're just bigger than the little brown bats. So if you guys take a look back in there, this is Echo. And Echo gets her name based on a really cool adaptation that she does in order to find her way around. She uses something called echolocation. So you can see how she's moving her mouth right now, but you're not hearing anything. And that is because it is way, way, way too high pitched for our ears to even try to hear it. They are able to make those sound waves, make those noises, and those waves will bounce back at them so they can kind of get an idea of where something might be. It helps them find food, avoid trees, and maybe even avoid each other. But they still have pretty good eyesight. But since they're awake at night, making them nocturnal, they have the need to use that echolocation because even on some of the brightest nights, it can still be pretty dark outside, especially if you're moving quite quickly. Now she's giving us a great view of her wing right there. Her wing have the same bones as in your hand. So if you hold up your hand and wiggle it, you've got your phalanges that are out in your finger. And all of those bones are what makes up her wings. So I've actually got a skeleton right here of a bat. So you can take a look at this and see that all those little bones kind of look like a really weird looking hand. And that's because that is what it is. So they have the adaptation of having those bones help them create their wings to help them fly. You can also see just how teeny, teeny, tiny those bones are. I mean, some of them are smaller than a toothpick, and that helps them be very, very light when they fly. Because could you imagine us having wings and trying to fly? I don't know if you've ever held like a cape and tried jumping off the couch, but it doesn't work too great for us because we're quite too heavy. In fact, let me see. I have a tablet right here that lets me hear. So this is a special gadget that we have that helps us hear that ultrasonic sounds that she makes. And then it takes it and produces a sound that we can actually hear with our ears. So let's see if she'll give us some chats. She is not being talkative at the moment. So if you guys hear that high pitch, almost squeaking bark-like sound, that is what she sounds like if we were able to hear her.
Does that work for lots of different animals?
It can, yes. This specific app is called Wildlife Acoustics. And so they have a specific program made for bats that actually will help you. You can walk around at night and it'll help identify the bat based on the call because each different bat speaks in a little bit of a different language. And so this app actually can tell us what type of bats are flying around. We've used it out in the zoo for some of our overnight programs, and we've caught a couple of different ones. And it's pretty cool to know who is flying around because, like I said, you can't hear them, so you would not know they were around otherwise.
I have a question. Do we have bats, like wild bats in Wichita?
We do, yes. In Kansas, we have over 10 species of bats that can be found here. One of the more common ones is going to be the big brown bat. The other one, which happens to be a fan favorite around here, is the hoary bat. They are a lot smaller than the ones you would find over in our tropics building. Those ones are from South America. The ones we have here are about this big, not very big at all, but they do live around here.
I saw some in my neighborhood. If you look right at like dusk,
yes,
you really focus.
That is when they are actually most active because that's often when the bugs and insects are most active as well. As they get later into the night and those temperatures drop, it ends up that those bugs end up going dormant again, not as quite as active. And if your food is moving around, it makes it a little bit easier to find it.
Let's see, we have some questions coming in about bats.
Perfect.
And so where, like, they hear about the, bats hanging upside down in a cave. How are these different from what, you see in cartoons or things like that?
Yes, not all bats live in caves. A good number of them do, but there's also bats that will hang in different trees. There's also ones that prefer living in old buildings. So things like chimneys or old abandoned barnyards, things like that. They like hanging in those buildings because it provides a type of protection. If you guys are ever interested about having them in your yard, you can build a small bat house, and those are just very simple wood planks. You can hang those outside, and it provides a habitat for them to spend the night. They love those tight little spaces, but most of the ones, especially here in Kansas, we don't have a lot of caves. And so them living in caves here would not be very beneficial to them.
And then how old do they get?
That is a really good question. That's kind of hard for us to know. We're battling a couple of different things when it comes to bats. The first one is rabies, which is something a number of animals can get. But the one that's really dangerous going on for bat populations right now is something called white nose syndrome, which is a fungus that wakes them up in the winter when they're hibernating, and it makes them use up a lot more of their energy. It gets its name because it almost looks like a powder on their face, like they just kind of ate a powdered donut. So that is something. So we are looking at a couple of different, I say we, like the animal community, are looking at a couple of different things. The best guess that we have, because they're really hard to keep track of one for a long time, is that they live to about between like 5 and 10 years old. So not a super long time, but enough to have a couple of pups. In human care, when we can give them medicine, make sure they're getting all the right food, keep them nice and warm in the winter, they'll live a little bit longer with us.
Time for an adventure shout out. We'd like to say hi to Mrs. Humphrey's first grade class. Hope you're having a great day out there. So another thing, a lot of questions is, are the bats dangerous?
So I always recommend looking with your eyes, but giving them a really good space. Anything with a mouth can bite. Anything who feels scared may end up attacking. So the best thing you can do is observe from a safe distance. And that is for any animal that you find out in the wild, and even with other kinds of pets. So I would always recommend, if you find a bat, the first thing you should do is go tell your adult, and then you guys can make some observations from quite a bit of a ways back.
And then another question I missed earlier, they really want to know what eats the tarantula.
What eats a tarantula? There's actually a lot of things that would eat a tarantula. Most of them happen to be bird species. So different kinds of birds will eat those larger insects, and they make quite a tasty snack if you're a hungry bird.
And then, as usual, they're really curious about you, Bailey. They want to know how you got into, working at the zoo and things like that.
Yeah, so I actually graduated from Oklahoma State with a degree in wildlife. I've always loved working with animals and learning more about them, but one of my absolute favorite things to do is talk about them. So I managed to find a job where I get to work with both students and the animals, and I get to talk about how amazing animals are and why we should protect them.
Awesome.
Awesome. We have 2 more animals that we're going to take a look at today. You guys ready for the next 2?
Let's go.
All right. Over here, I have a woodhouse toad. So woodhouse toad is an amphibian. That word actually means 2 lives. And that's because they spend part of their life completely in water and part of it on land. They still rely on the water, but when they lay their eggs, they'll lay them in water. They'll hatch into tadpoles, similar to other frog species. And then as they grow up, they'll become froglets, losing that tail and getting legs, and then finally the beautiful toad we have here. This woodhouse toad is actually going to be one of the ones you're going to find in your neighborhood. That is because they really like living in areas where people are, because it's really easy to find bugs to eat when they're around all those different porch lights. So if you ever leave your porch light on at night, you might notice that there's a lot of moths and different bugs flying around. So that is what the woodhouse toad have adapted to being able to help them find food. Typically, they would be around different other water sources without humans, where that moonlight would shine onto the water and attract the bugs that way. So it's just kind of a different way that they find their food, since there's a lot of people in areas. His name is Woody. He makes a pretty adorable sound, and occasionally you'll hear it. It's almost like a meh. It's very cute. They have a pretty interesting skeletal structure as well, meaning these are what the bones in their body look like. So they have ribs just like we do, but if you notice, their eyes are really, really big. That is because they need those big eye holes because their eyes actually help them swallow. So if you guys open up your mouth, you can feel that there's a bone down here, our bottom jaw. If you look really closely at this skeleton, you might see that there is no bottom on that jaw. That is because they do not have one. So instead, when they grab their food and they're trying to eat it, they use both their sticky tongue and then they'll use their eyeballs to push them in to help push that food down their throat to help them swallow. Could you imagine using your eyeballs to help you swallow? That'd be pretty silly. The other thing you might notice on here is that they have really big back feet. He's over there doing some little hops showing off a really cute behavior that they do. And that helps them, of course, get around. They will do a little bit of a walking, but that is the most beneficial way that they'll move is by hopping around. Oh, do we have any questions about woodhouse toads and other amphibians?
They're really curious about this two lives term that you talked about.
Yeah. So amphibian, it's a Latin word, and it does mean two lives because part of their life, they're completely in water, almost like a fish. And for the other half, they're going to be on land. And so having those two very different parts of their lives makes up those two very different portions. So when they're babies and they're laid in the water as little eggs, they'll hatch out as tadpoles. And as they go through their life cycle, they'll start to grow legs, they'll start to lose their tail to start to kind of shrink up. And then eventually one day they'll hop out of the water and be on land. And then they'll go on to lay eggs themselves.
And then here's a question. How many bugs can the frogs eat at once?
Oh, that is a good question. Oh, I don't know the answer to that question. They can eat a whole bunch of bugs, but all at once, probably as many as they could stick their tongue out and grab. So I'd say maybe 2 or 3 at most, but more than likely, they'll just eat them one at a time.
Ooh, scary for the frogs. So I guess frogs are scary. All right, moving on.
All right, the last one I have today is actually our state reptile. It is an ornate box turtle. If you head right over here, I have got Bashful, who is our ornate box turtle. They get their name because they have that really beautiful pattern on their shell. They became our Kansas state reptile in 1986, and it was actually nominated by a group of 6th graders in Caldwell to become our state reptile. And so then the governor ended up signing that into law. And so now they are our state reptile and a great representation of all the different diverse animals that we have in Kansas. They have a great adaptation of having their shell protect them. They are one of the few species that can completely pull their legs, head, tail, neck, all of it in and close up their shell, making it a little bit harder for things like raccoons, skunks, or possums to eat them. Their shells are 2 parts, and if you've ever heard that a turtle can crawl out of its shell, that is very much not true. If you guys will actually take your hand and feel on your back, you will feel kind of those bumps going up and down. That is your spine. If you were to take your spine out, it wouldn't be good for you. And it's kind of the same thing for a turtle. If you look really closely right here, you can see the spines on the inside of that shell. So that is the backbone of a turtle. For ornate box turtles and most other turtles, they are completely independent their whole life, meaning that their mom and dad never take care of them. In fact, they'll likely never meet them. They are born very tiny, like even smaller than this little turtle shell. And as soon as they hatch out of the egg, they'll go looking for water and food all on their own. So if you ever see a little baby turtle, don't worry, it didn't lose its parent. It just is that independent as soon as it hatches. Now, turtles on a day like today, in the past couple of weeks that we've had, would not do too great out in the wild, right? It's been pretty cold. They don't make their own body heat, but instead they have a behavioral adaptation, meaning it's something they do that helps them survive. That behavioral adaptation is that they dig. They burrow and make a little hole way down into the ground and bury themselves up to 2 feet underground so that when that ground gets really, really, really cold and freezes, they're below the point of freezing so that they can stay safe and a little bit warmer throughout the winter. So then now when it warms up in the spring and starts getting all nice and rainy and bringing in all of that fresh spring weather, they'll unbury themselves, dig out, and become active turtles again. So they do that really crazy thing. I think it's so interesting that they bury themselves. Our turtles here actually do bury themselves a little bit, even though they get heat year round. So it's kind of interesting that even though they get the same amount of heat and light, they still do a little bit of burying for themselves.
And how long do the box turtles live?
You're asking me a hard question that I'm blanking on right now. I cannot remember at the moment.
We'll figure that out. That was just one of the questions. And then how long does the whole process take? Like, are you going to see these mostly around rivers, lakes? Where do you find most of these?
So these ones are actually going to be found out in the prairie grassland area. They cannot swim. If you were to throw them in water, they would sink. They are technically a type of tortoise, even though we call them a box turtle. And so they will be found out in there areas where there's lots of different grasses. They are omnivores, meaning they both eat meat and vegetables. So they'll eat some smaller bugs, as well as maybe even some smaller frogs or even little baby mice. They love strawberries here. That is one of their favorite things. Anything the color red, tomatoes, things like that, they really enjoy. And forgot what I was saying.
This sounds like a perfect time for you to get a chance to take a selfie with Bailey, our specialist here at the zoo. So we're going to wait here for about 10 seconds and give you a chance to snap a selfie with Bailey here.
Crown.
All right, perfect. We want to thank y'all so much for joining us today on another adventure. And we want to throw a big thank you to Sedgwick County Zoo. And you all have a wonderful rest of your Kansas day. We are signing off. Thank you so much.